Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of our scary stories. I am your host, your guide into the shadowy corners of fear and the chilling unknown. Tonight, we traverse the foggy boundaries of reality, entering a realm where the open road holds an unthinkable terror. Sit back, close your eyes, but keep your senses sharp. This isn't just another highway journey, this is a ride on the highway of the damned. Are you ready for the unknown? The sun was just starting to dip behind the endless canvas of the sky, painting everything in hues of orange and gold. An old highway rest stop, wedged between the arms of the desert, was the only interruption in the monotony. An oasis of life in the midst of emptiness. 5 weary strangers found themselves pulled towards this unlikely sanctuary. Sarah, with her red-rimmed glasses and faded jeans, was seeking solace from her recent heartbreak. She still smelled faintly of vanilla and regret, the remnants of a life left behind. Tony, the wanderer, found comfort in the open road. His hair, touched by the sun, mirrored the sandy landscape, and his eyes held a distant, dreamy quality. Gary, broad-shouldered and guarded, was an ex-con in a worn leather jacket. He had a hard gaze and a rough, gravelly voice that rarely spoke unless necessary. Rachel was the embodiment of curiosity. Her short hair whipped around in the evening breeze, and her hazel eyes sparkled with unspoken dreams. Lastly, there was Chris, a war veteran who carried himself with an air of tired alertness. He had a keen, observant gaze, and a slight limp in his walk. In the symphony of the evening, the distinct buzz of cicadas mingled with the low hum of the nearby highway. The air was filled with the scent of gasoline, warm asphalt, and impending adventure. The somber growl of an 18-wheeler disrupted the harmony. Its lights pierced the thickening twilight, casting long shadows that danced around the strangers. Out stepped Jeb, the truck driver, a looming silhouette against the backdrop of his monstrous vehicle. He was a grim man, his eyes hidden beneath a faded cap. His voice, much like his truck's engine, was low and rumbling, seeming to resonate in the very air around them. Headed to Crescent City. Room for 5. Hop in if you want. His words hung in the air, a tantalizing offer of escape from their static lives. Drawn together by the silent agreement of shared danger and the possibility of companionship, the strangers accepted his offer. As they clambered up into the giant beast of metal and steel, they found themselves embraced by the scent of old leather and strong black coffee, a long-haul trucker's cologne. The highway stretched out before them, a serpentine trail that disappeared into the coming darkness. As the wheels began to roll and the truck rumbled back onto the highway, Jeb began to spin a tale. It was a story meant to chill the bones and raise the hair on the back of their necks, a legend of the cursed highway they now found themselves on. The interior of the truck cab transformed into a chamber of shadows, punctuated only by the pale glow from the dashboard. It was in this spectral light that the unsuspecting hitchhikers first saw the ghostly glint of amusement in Jeb's eyes. As they ventured deeper into the abyss, the dim drone of the highway was replaced with an ominous silence. In the heart of that silence, Jeb's ghost story became their reality. And so, the night drew its black velvet curtain over the highway, setting the stage for the haunted journey that was to begin. The truck, with its 5 passengers, drove on, swallowed by the maw of darkness and unknown terrors. As the miles scrolled by, the truck's tires rhythmically humming on the asphalt sounded like an ancient incantation, almost musical. In the belly of the 18-wheeler, the 5 strangers clung to their own thoughts, each lost in the sea of Jeb's eerie tales. Jeb, behind the steering wheel, seemed unaffected by the tension in the cab. He wore the darkness around him like a second skin, each story he spun making him seem more a part of the ominous night than their world. Sarah's fingers absently traced the frost that formed intricate, lace-like patterns on the window. Her breath fogged up the glass, momentarily obscuring the desolate landscape outside. She shivered, her mind unable to shake off the chill in Jeb's stories. She could still smell the faint traces of his tobacco-infused breath as he narrated tales of the damned, his laughter a grating echo in her ears. Tony sat next to her, his ever-present wanderlust momentarily dimmed. His eyes were on the rearview mirror, reflecting the eerie glow of the truck's tail lights. The darkness was so profound, it felt as if they were driving into the throat of a monstrous beast. Rachel found her academic curiosity piqued. She asked questions, her words dropping like stones into the quiet cab, creating ripples that unsettled the uneasy peace. Jeb entertained her inquiries, his answers only serving to deepen the mystery. Gary remained silent, his eyes lost in the abstract patterns created by oncoming headlights against the rain-streaked windshield. He could taste the fear in the air, a flavor he knew all too well. The scars on his knuckles seemed to throb in the semi-darkness. Chris, ever the soldier, was on high alert. His senses were taut, ready for whatever lay ahead. He could feel the tension twisting in his gut, a coil winding tighter with each passing mile. Suddenly, their world changed. The truck's headlights illuminated an eerie sight, a ghostly convoy of trucks appearing from the depth of the night. Each vehicle seemed to glow with an ethereal light, their monstrous silhouettes shimmering as if viewed through a heat haze. Jeb laughed, a rough, grating sound. "You see them," he called out, his voice a thunderous whisper in the stunned silence. "The convoy of the lost souls. You're seeing the highway's curse come alive." The sight was strangely mesmerizing. The phantom convoy moved in tandem with their truck, their ghostly headlights creating a mesmerizing dance of shadows and light across the cab's interior. The radios crackled to life on their own, spouting garbled conversations layered with static that felt like whispered secrets of the damned. Fear was no longer a hidden scent. It was now a potent aroma that curled around each passenger. Unspoken terror bound the group together, each privately wondering if they would ever escape the haunted highway they were now trapped on. The ghostly spectacle ended as abruptly as it started, leaving them in chilling darkness once more. From that point on, the highway they knew was gone, replaced by an asphalt river flowing between the spectral landscapes of the mortal realm and the underworld. The boundaries of reality blurred. The air seemed denser, the silence deeper. Even the truck seemed to groan under the weight of their shared dread. Their journey on the highway of the damned had just begun. The world around them morphed as the highway unwound like a film reel under the constant march of the truck's tires. Where once stood barren desert, there now loomed endless fields of ashen fog, swirling in patterns that almost seemed purposeful. The moon, once a sliver of light in the heavens, was now a great fiery orb, casting an otherworldly glow that made the ghostly fog glisten. The truck cab hummed with a quiet tension. Their breaths came out in short bursts, creating ghost-like apparitions in the frigid air. Fear hung heavy, unspoken yet understood, each heartbeat a thunderous drum resonating within the confines of the truck. In the distance, a structure appeared, an island in the sea of fog. As they got closer, it took on the familiar shape of a truck stop. But this one was different. The neon sign that loomed above it flickered erratically, casting a sickly green light that made the fog dance in ghoulish hues. Jeb maneuvered the truck into the lot, parking beside an array of ethereal 18-wheelers. He turned to his passengers, his eyes glinting with a strange excitement. "Welcome to Purgatory's Edge," he announced, a grin cutting across his face. His words echoed in the cab, each syllable bouncing off the cold metal walls and burrowing into their consciousness. As the reality of his statement sank in, a chilling quiet enveloped them. The cab was no longer just a cab. It was a metal cage trapping them in an unfathomable nightmare. The 5 passengers gazed at the truck stop in silent horror. It was bustling with activity, but not the kind they knew. The figures moving around seemed more like wraiths than humans. They were formless, their bodies shifting and morphing with the fog, their faces lost in a blur of swirling mist. They drifted around the truck stop, their silent screams echoing in the wind, amplifying the terror clawing at their hearts. The air smelt of diesel, but beneath it was the sharp tang of fear, and a sickly sweet undertone of despair. The scent was disturbing, an olfactory nightmare that twisted their stomachs and made their skin crawl. Jeb's nonchalance was a stark contrast to their collective terror. He hopped off the truck, leaving the door ajar. "Best stretch your legs," he advised, sauntering off into the morass of the damned. The 5 exchanged glances, the desperation in their eyes reflecting the unnatural incandescence around them. The fear they had been tasting had now morphed into an overwhelming sense of dread. Stepping out of the truck meant stepping into an abyss they did not understand. But what choice did they have? With a collective breath, they uncoiled their stiff bodies, each step heavier than the last, as they descended from the sanctuary of the truck onto the cursed ground of Purgatory's Edge. This was their new reality, a nightmarish landscape that straddled the realm of the living and hell. Their journey into the unknown had taken a sinister turn, and they were now pawns in a game that transcended mortality. They were at the intersection of life and death. They were on the highway of the damned. As the 5 stepped onto the alien landscape of the truck stop, a sense of dread clung to them like a second skin. The soles of their shoes scuffed against the coarse asphalt, each step an act of defiance against the nightmarish reality they found themselves in. Their gazes swept over the eerie scene. The ghostly 18-wheelers towered like gargantuan creatures of the night. The transient souls that milled about were like lost whispers on the wind, each wisp carrying a story of life unlived. The air was frigid, filled with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. The peculiar glow of the fiery moon painted the entire scene in hues of the netherworld. Jeb walked amongst the ghostly figures nonchalantly, unaffected by the unnerving atmosphere. His laughter boomed across the lot, bouncing off the metallic surfaces of the trucks. It was a jarring contrast to the muffled sorrow that clung to every other sound. Sarah clung to Tony, her body trembling. Tony's comforting arm around her did little to quell the icy fear gripping her heart. Each hushed whisper from the ethereal crowd was a chilling reminder of their predicament. Rachel's academic curiosity warred with her terror. Her eyes darted around, absorbing the unreal spectacle. The peculiar phenomena around her were a jigsaw puzzle, each piece more terrifying than the last. Gary was a picture of stoicism, but his clenched fists belied his calm exterior. His past was a testament to survival, but this was a test he hadn't prepared for. The cries of the lost souls bore into his mind, their despair mirroring his own. Chris stood tall, his soldier's instinct pulling him together. His gaze was steel, even as his mind churned with trepidation. He focused on the distant howls that seemed to emanate from the foggy horizon. They were a chilling promise of what lay ahead. Suddenly, the realization hit them. The stories that Jeb had shared were not mere tales. The apparitions were not illusions. They were trapped in an infernal transit system, a conduit ferrying souls between the mortal world and the underworld. The truck stop was a purgatory, an intermediate realm for lost souls awaiting their damned voyage. The drivers were not merely men, they were the ferrymen of hell. And they, the 5 strangers, were unwilling passengers on this gruesome voyage. Jeb returned to the group, a wide grin on his face. His amusement was a grim reminder of their predicament. He gestured at the semi-translucent crowd. "Our cargo," he announced, his tone nonchalant, as if he were speaking of ordinary freight. The grim announcement seemed to freeze the very air around them. Their breath hitched, hearts pounding like war drums in their chests. Jeb's words ricocheted around their minds, amplifying their terror. Their journey on the open road had taken them into the heart of darkness. The end of the highway was their beginning into the abyss. The truck, their cage, beckoned them ominously. Jeb was their captor, their guide, their ferryman. There was no going back. There was only the cursed road ahead, the highway of the damned. The truck stop of Purgatory's edge was their unnerving reality, a reality they had to navigate if they were to survive their unholy hitchhike. As the ghastly reality of their situation set in, the 5 found themselves drawn towards the gathering of truckers. The crowd was an odd mix of temporal specters, beings that were once humans but were now twisted into something far from mortality. These drivers were like Jeb, each a silent ferryman on this accursed highway. Their faces held stories etched by time and countless journeys into the abyss, their eyes gleaming with an eerie light that seemed to stem from an internal fire. Each carried a distinctive scent, an amalgam of the natural and the supernatural. The smell of damp soil clashed with the ethereal musk of the spirit world, creating an unsettling olfactory landscape. In the midst of this gathering, Jeb was at ease. His booming laugh was a beacon in the heavy silence, a jarring reminder of their strange predicament. He shared tales with his kin, his narrative sending a collective shiver down the spine of his captive passengers. Sarah, clutching Tony's arm, took in the spectral assembly. Each phantom face was a stark reminder of the realm they had unwittingly entered. Every laugh, every whisper was a testament to the countless souls ferried along the highway of the damned. The peculiar, garish glow of the surroundings reflected in her wide, fear-stricken eyes, painting a picture of a mortal trapped in an immortal saga. Rachel, her academic curiosity winning over her fear, listened attentively to the spectral truckers. They spoke of centuries, of souls lost and delivered, of worlds unseen by mortal eyes. Her heart pounded as their words wove a tapestry of terror, but a part of her reveled in the knowledge of the world beyond. Chris, the soldier, eyed the crowd with suspicion. He readied himself, prepared to fight unseen foes, ready to brave the challenges the cursed highway would throw at them. His gaze met Jeb's across the lot, their silent communication acknowledging the war they were both part of. Meanwhile, Gary was lost in his thoughts, his eyes focused on the phantom trucks. Each monstrous vehicle was a cage on wheels, ferrying souls to pay for their sins. A disturbing thought lingered in his mind. Could he strike a deal with the ferrymen? Could he offer his services, his freedom, for his salvation? Unsettling silence wrapped around them again. The ghostly truckers continued their whispered tales, their voices carrying the weight of countless years and innumerable souls. The hitchhikers, their hearts filled with dread, were left to consider their plight. Caught between life and the underworld, they now understood their captors. The drivers were bound to the highway, damned to ferry souls until they repaid their debts. The truck stop, Purgatory's Edge, was merely a station in this grim journey. As the dread settled, their resolve hardened. They were trapped, but not defeated. They were prisoners, but not lost. The road ahead was perilous, but they would traverse it together. For they were no longer just hitchhikers on the open road. They were survivors on the highway of the damned. Underneath the fire-lit sky, amongst the ghostly trucks and their phantom drivers, a glimmer of hope began to take shape within Tony. He observed the ethereal crowd, his mind churning with thoughts, brewing a plan amidst the chaos. The wind that howled across the lot carried whispers of countless journeys, and thousands of souls, and beneath that, the faintest hints of desperation. It was this desperation that gave Tony a spark of inspiration. He pulled the group closer, his hushed voice barely a whisper against the eerie symphony of the otherworldly truck stop. "We need to trick them," he began, his gaze focused on the crowd of phantom drivers. The group exchanged anxious glances, but the determination in Tony's eyes stilled their objections. His plan was as desperate as their situation: trick the demonic drivers, switch places, and somehow convince someone else to drive them back to the realm of the living. It was risky, absurd even, but amidst the hopeless predicament they found themselves in, Tony's plan seemed like a candle flickering in the darkness. Sarah's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and hope as she considered his words. The scent of burned rubber and stale coffee no longer unsettled her, but rather felt like a strange anchor in this uncanny reality. She held onto Tony's arm tighter, her agreement wordless, but clear. Rachel's academic interest was piqued by Tony's proposal. His plan was a psychological gambit that teetered on the edge of possibility. The ghastly smell of the spirit realm, the chilling whispers of the lost souls, none of it fazed her now. Her nod of approval came swift and decisive, the spark in her eyes a testament to her agreement. Gary mulled over the plan, his fingers unconsciously tracing the worn-out edges of his leather jacket. He could still taste the metallic tang of fear, but underneath it there was a hint of resolve. His nod was reluctant but firm, an affirmation shrouded in uncertainty. Chris's soldier instincts kicked in at Tony's plan. It was a battle strategy, one with numerous uncertainties, but it was their only shot. He could still feel the chill of the other world in his bones, but the warmth of hope was slowly starting to thaw the icy fear. His nod of agreement was sharp, military-like, his gaze reflecting a resolve forged in the furnace of countless battles. Together, they began to fine-tune their plan, their huddled whispers blending into the cacophony of ghostly murmurs. Each contributed ideas and suggestions, their collective fear slowly giving way to the spark of resistance. The atmosphere inside the cab was no longer just frigid and terrifying, but also filled with the faint undercurrent of rebellion. The road to their salvation was fraught with danger, but they were willing to face it head-on. They were no longer just passengers on this infernal voyage. They were the catalysts of their own destiny. The gears were in motion, the first step towards their escape from the highway of the damned. And so, under the gaze of the fiery moon and amidst the phantom crowd, their plan of rebellion took shape. They were ready to outwit the demonic drivers, ready to challenge their grim fate. They were ready to reclaim their lives from the grip of the underworld. As twilight gave way to the cold blackness of the netherworld's night, the hitchhikers steeled themselves for the execution of their plan. The monstrous trucks around them seemed to groan and shudder, as if sensing the upcoming rebellion. Tony, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum, approached Jeb, his voice casual but his eyes alight with determination. He weaved a story, one that he hoped would lure the grim trucker into their trap. Jeb listened, the ghostly glow from the surroundings casting strange shadows across his craggy face. Sarah and Rachel watched anxiously from the side. The ever-present scent of decay and diesel fuel seemed sharper now, the taste of fear and anticipation filling their mouths. Each word from Tony felt like a precarious step on a tightrope. Away from the gathering, Chris kept a watchful eye on the phantom truckers, his body coiled and ready to spring into action. He felt like a soldier on the battlefield once again, the familiar adrenaline coursing through his veins and sharpening his senses. Meanwhile, Gary lurked on the periphery, his mind a whirl of thoughts. As he watched Tony weaving their trap, a dangerous idea began to take root in his mind. His gaze wandered to the demonic drivers, and he found himself questioning the path they had chosen. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Tony's words had found their mark, sparking an unforeseen reaction in Jeb. The truck stop, usually filled with the murmuring whispers of the lost souls, was now awash with discordant cries and the roar of phantom engines. The drivers, their faces contorted in anger and suspicion, swarmed towards Tony. Their ethereal forms twisted and shimmered, the chill of their anger prickling the air. The scent of charred metal and burning fuel replaced the cold smell of the netherworld, a sensory manifestation of their rising fury. Just as they reached Tony, Chris sprang into action. His soldiers' training kicked in, his movements a dance of desperation and determination. Each punch, each tackle was a plea for survival, his actions causing ripples in the ghostly crowd. Sarah and Rachel, the initial shock subsiding, joined the fray. They fought with a courage born of desperation, their attacks seeming to stagger the demonic drivers. The truck stop was a battleground now, their battle cries merging with the otherworldly roars. Amidst the chaos, Gary's betrayal came to light. He sided with the demonic drivers, his actions a stark contrast to his companions. His desperation for salvation had led him down a different path, one that promised his safety at the cost of his friends. The battle reached a crescendo when Tony was captured. The driver's ghostly hands held him, their cold grasp a chilling promise of a fate worse than death. His eyes met Sarah's across the battleground, a silent plea for forgiveness. Just as quickly as it began, the chaos subsided. The once bustling truck stop was now eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant wails of the lost souls and the heavy panting of the survivors. Jeb's laughter rang out, a chilling reminder of their failure. Their plan had backfired. They were back to being prisoners, their hope snuffed out like a candle in a storm. With one of them a captive and another a traitor, their situation seemed more desperate than ever. Their rebellion had taken a devastating turn, their journey on the highway of the damned becoming increasingly perilous. The road to their salvation was now paved with betrayal and despair, their escape from the netherworld hanging by a thread. The sound of Jeb's laughter echoed ominously around the truck stop, a chilling punctuation to the rebellion's catastrophic end. Gary stood on the outskirts of the crowd, his heart heavy with a blend of regret and resignation, his betrayal casting long shadows under the netherworld's fire-lit sky. His decision had shifted the balance, transforming the tide of battle into a devastating defeat. Tony was now a captive, his attempt at trickery rewarded with the cold grip of the demonic drivers. The rest of the group was scattered, their resolve shattered by the unforeseen treachery. Sarah, Rachel, and Chris retreated, their bodies bruised and spirits battered. The ghostly whispers of the lost souls seemed louder now, each spectral sigh echoing their despair. The smell of burned rubber was overpowered by the scent of betrayal, the taste of defeat lingering in their mouths. Tony, held captive by the ghostly drivers, wore an expression of stunned disbelief. His gaze found Gary's across the chaos, his confusion mirrored in the ex-con's eyes. His plan had faltered, his hopeful spark snuffed out, replaced by the chilling reality of his captivity. Gary, under the watchful gaze of his former companions, found himself at the mercy of the phantom truckers. He had chosen his path, aligning himself with the damned ferrymen in hopes of securing his own salvation. Yet, amidst the ethereal drivers, he felt more lost than ever. Jeb's laughter subsided, replaced by a grim satisfaction. He regarded the aftermath, his eyes lingering on Tony's desperate form. He had seen many passengers over the centuries, many desperate souls seeking escape. Yet, this rebellion was a first, a futile attempt at challenging the laws of his cursed existence. Silence fell over the truck stop once again, the earlier chaos receding like a gruesome nightmare. Yet the consequences were all too real, the aftermath a haunting reminder of their desperate situation. A highway of the damned stretched before them, a path of despair and fear. Their rebellion had failed, their group splintered. With a traitor in their midst and one of their own a captive, their journey seemed doomed. Yet, amidst the despair, a glimmer of determination ignited in their hearts. They had faced a setback, but they were far from defeated. Their journey was far from over, their desire to escape the hellish landscape burning brighter than ever. And so, under the fiery gaze of the netherworld's moon, amidst the ghostly whispers of lost souls, they prepared to fight back. Their path was fraught with betrayal and danger, their hope a flickering flame in the encompassing darkness. They had tasted defeat, but they were not yet defeated. Their journey on the highway of the damned was set to take another turn, their resolve hardening in the face of despair. They were down, but not out, their escape from the netherworld a goal they clung to, a beacon in the heart of their shared nightmare. As the dust settled and the eerie quiet returned, the survivors regrouped. Sarah, Rachel, and Chris huddled together, their breaths mingling in the frigid air. They watched as Jeb and his ghostly companions dragged Tony towards a monstrous truck, his struggles echoing in their ears. Each phantom whisper carried a piece of their shattered hopes, the taste of defeat sour on their tongues. Yet they clung onto a sliver of determination, their will to escape the damned highway unbroken. Rachel was the first to break the silence. Her voice, although quiet, cut through the gloom. "We need to get Tony back," she stated, her tone resolute. Sarah and Chris nodded in silent agreement, their collective will forming a beacon of hope in the unsettling stillness. Away from them, Gary watched the scene unfold. His heart ached with regret, his actions having tipped the balance of power. He had hoped his alignment with the ferrymen would offer him salvation. Yet, watching his former companions plan their next move, he couldn't ignore the pang of guilt. In a moment of unexpected rebellion, Gary approached Jeb, his stride full of feigned confidence. Jeb turned, his eyes glinting with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "I want to make a deal," Gary said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. Jeb's laughter echoed across the truck stop, the sound blending into the whispers of the lost souls. Yet there was a glimmer of interest in his eyes, a spark of intrigue ignited by Gary's proposition. Meanwhile, Sarah, Rachel, and Chris put together a new plan. They had one goal, to retrieve Tony and escape the damned highway. Their resolve was a flame flickering in the darkness, casting long shadows of hope amidst their despair. Back at the demonic gathering, Gary held his ground under Jeb's scrutinizing gaze. He offered a simple yet dangerous bargain, his eternal servitude in exchange for his friend's safe passage back to their realm. The words hung in the air, a bold challenge that punctured the heavy silence. Jeb considered the proposition, his gaze piercing through Gary. The concept was new, an unexpected twist in the countless years of his existence. The idea of having another human join their ranks was an enticing prospect, one that could add an interesting spin to his monotonous eternity. As the netherworld's fiery moon watched over them, an agreement was struck, a dangerous bargain etched into existence. Gary's fate was sealed, his destiny intertwined with the phantom truckers forever. Yet, the agreement offered a ray of hope to Sarah, Rachel, and Chris. Their journey on the highway of the damned had taken another sinister turn, but their resolve remained unbroken. They had a plan and a glimmer of hope, their goal to escape the hellish landscape clear in their hearts. The haunted truck stop, their momentary purgatory, bore silent witness to their bargain and their resolve. The night was far from over, and their journey was far from its end. They were still trapped in their nightmarish hitchhike, their survival hanging by a thread on the highway of the damned. The atmosphere was rife with an ominous stillness as the deal was sealed. Gary, the newly sworn ferryman, watched his former companions from across the lot. His path was now set in stone, his destiny forever chained to the highway of the damned. Sarah, Rachel, and Chris readied themselves, their hearts pounding with a cocktail of fear and anticipation. Their focus was razor sharp, their will to rescue Tony and escape their nightmarish journey stronger than ever. The stakes were high, but so was their resolve. Under the ghastly glare of the netherworld's moon, they made their move. Chris led the charge, his soldier instincts guiding him through the spectral crowd. His every move was calculated, his actions a desperate dance for survival. Rachel followed, her mind running scenarios, her academic prowess a useful weapon in their daring rescue. Her eyes were locked onto Tony, her determination unyielding. Sarah brought up the rear, her fear channeled into focused resolve. She moved with a surprising agility, her actions echoing the desperation shared by her companions. The drivers watched in stunned silence as the rebellion unfolded before their eyes. Jeb, however, was unperturbed. He wore a smile, his amusement a stark contrast to the rising tension. He watched as the remaining hitchhikers fought to reclaim their companion and their freedom. The moment of truth arrived with the urgency of a lightning strike. With a final, desperate push, they reached Tony, freeing him from the phantom grip of the drivers. His relief was a tangible presence in the air, a beacon of hope in their grim reality. Their triumph was short-lived, though. The drivers regained their senses, their spectral forms rising in a show of defiance. A wall of ghostly figures towered over the group, their fury a chilling threat. It was then that Gary stepped in. His voice boomed across the lot, his commands echoing with the authority of his new rank. The drivers paused, their attention drawn to their new companion. Gary's diversion worked, granting his former companions the precious seconds they needed. They made a break for it, their hearts thundering in their chests. The ghostly drivers gave chase, their roars echoing through the frigid air. The truck stop was a battlefield once again, the stakes higher than ever. Sarah, Rachel, Chris, and Tony reached Jeb's truck. They scrambled aboard, their hands shaking as they fired up the monstrous vehicle. The truck roared to life, its engine a grating symphony that drowned out the ethereal cries of the drivers. With a final look at Gary, who stood with Jeb amidst the spectral crowd, they steered the truck onto the highway. The monstrous vehicle roared down the cursed path, away from the hellish truck stop, the furious cries of the phantom drivers fading into the distance. The highway stretched out before them, an ominous ribbon winding through the netherworld. Yet they drove on, their spirits bolstered by their narrow escape. Their journey on the highway of the damned was not over, but they were no longer prisoners. They were survivors. As the truck disappeared into the horizon, the ghostly cries at Purgatory's edge softened into hushed whispers. We've reached the end of our chilling journey, dear listeners. We've traveled the highway of the damned and survived to tell the tale. As you return to the familiar humdrum of your life, remember, not all who wander are lost. Some are just trapped on the unpredictable highway of life and death. Thank you for joining me on this eerie expedition. This is our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.